snow had been coming off the Bighorn Mountains since before dawn, and the temperature outside Sheridan, Wyoming had not cleared 20 degrees by the time Staff Sergeant Reed Calloway turned his truck down the gravel road off Route 14 at just past 8 in the morning for the first time in 12 years. In the passenger seat, Boone went completely still, not tense. Still, the deep, weighted stillness Reed had learned to read over 6 years together. The kind that meant the dog had already assessed something and was waiting for Reed to catch up. Through the windshield, the old farm came into view. The gray house, the bare cottonwoods, the fence line running west toward the Pruitt's land a quarter-mile up the hill. Smoke was coming from May Pruitt's chimney. What Reed found in that house before the morning was over would give him back something he had driven 1,400 miles convinced he no longer deserved. This is the kind of story this channel tells. If you're new here, subscribe so you're present when the next one comes. Reed Calloway was 38 years old and had spent the last 20 of them in a condition that most people who knew him would have described as capable, and that Reed himself would have described, on honest nights, as managed. He had enlisted at 18 from Sheridan, the son of a cattle rancher who woke at 4:30 every morning for 40 years and believed that the distance between what you were and what you were supposed to be was always, precisely, the amount of work you hadn't done yet. His father, Earl, had shaken his hand at the bus station and said nothing else, because nothing else needed saying, and Reed had understood this completely, and had been trying to say what he didn't say back for 20 years. He had done 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan, and had come back from all 3 changed in ways that were structural rather than dramatic, not broken, rearranged. He was a man who trusted the perimeter, who sat with his back to walls, who could read a room for threat in the time it took most people to hang their coat. He ran a small security consulting outfit out of Billings now, a 2-man operation that kept him busy and in motion, and motion had been the correct prescription for Reed Calloway for a very long time. He had not come back to Sheridan since the day after his father's funeral, 12 years ago. He had stood at the grave and said nothing, and driven away, and kept driving, and the farm had sat in his name ever since, rented out to a neighbor who ran a few head on the east pasture. The house kept up minimally, the taxes paid, the whole thing held in a state of unresolved suspension that Reed had managed by not thinking about it. He was back now to sign papers, shake hands, and drive away again. He had booked a motel in town, because he was not going to stay in the house. He was not going to do that. His closest friend in the unit had been a man named Curtis Webb, from a ranch outside Douglas, Wyoming. Same sky, same high country, same kind of father who woke before daylight and believed in the redemptive function of difficult work. Curtis had died in Mosul in 2007, and in the week before he died he had said to Reed, in the particular offhand way of men who are saying important things without flagging them as such, "Don't let them close it up while you're gone. Go back when you can." The land remembers. Reed had thought it was just talk. He was not sure anymore. Boone was a German shepherd, brindle and large, 82 pounds of retired patrol dog, who had been Reed's constant companion for 6 years, and who had, in that time, developed an expertise in Reed's silences that Reed found both reassuring and occasionally inconvenient. He took up most of the passenger seat, left his nose prints on every window he could reach, and had a snore that Reed's last girlfriend had described as a geological event. He was not a dog who alarmed easily. He had been trained to do the opposite, to remain steady in conditions that would unsettle most animals, and his steadiness was the foundation of everything Reed relied on in him. When Boone went completely still, it meant something that barking could not have expressed. It meant, "This matters." It meant, "Pay attention." It meant, in the language Reed had learned to speak over 6 years, that the thing in front of them had a weight he hadn't yet measured. The smoke from May Pruitt's chimney rose straight in the cold, windless morning. Boone had not moved. Reed parked at the old farm first, not going in, just parking, letting the truck idle and looking at the house through the windshield for a minute that stretched to several. He had expected to feel something large and organized, some named grief arriving finally in its proper form. What he felt instead was smaller and more specific, the way the front step had settled to the left, which it had done since he was 12, and which nobody had ever fixed. The porch swing still hung by one chain on the left side. The cottonwoods his mother had planted the year he was born were bigger than they had any right to be. He got out. Boone got out with him. They walked the fence line toward the Pruitts, because that was where Reed had been walking since he was old enough to walk it alone. Quarter-mile of post and wire up a long, slow rise. The bighorns to the west in their permanent cold morning blue. The smell of snow on the way. He had walked this fence with his father 100 times. He had walked it with Curtis Webb the summer they were both 17, and had decided that summer was the last one before the world asked something real of them. He had not walked it since. He knocked at May Pruitt's front door without having fully decided to. She came to the door in a blue housecoat and slippers, and when she saw Reed Calloway standing on her porch at 8 in the morning with a German shepherd beside him, she stood there for a moment with her hand on the doorframe and her face doing something that took him a moment to identify. She was not surprised. May Pruitt was 83 years old and had lived on this land for 42 years, and she had the particular quality of a woman who has been waiting for something she expected and has simply not known when it would arrive. She was small and white-haired with dark eyes that moved quickly and missed very little, and she was wearing, Reed noticed, a silver brooch on her housecoat. The kind you put on when you want to be presentable even at 8 in the morning. The kind you've worn for 60 years and don't take off just because you're alone. Reed Calloway, she said. May, he said. She looked at Boone. Boone looked at May. Then Boone walked past them both into the house, which was not something Reed had given him permission to do, and May stepped back to let him through as though she had been expecting the dog too. The front room smelled like coffee and wood smoke, and the particular mineral smell of old wool rugs in cold weather. And it had the quality of a room that had been lived in fully and specifically for a very long time. Photographs crowding the mantel, a quilt on the couch arm and a pattern Reed recognized from childhood, a stack of library books on the side table with a card in the name of May Eliza Pruitt tucked between them. Boone had gone to the mantel. He stood in front of it with his nose raised slightly, not to any of the framed photographs, but to something beside them, set back slightly, almost behind the photograph of a man Reed recognized as Roy Pruitt in better years. An envelope. White, aged to the color of old paper at the edges. Reed's name on the front in handwriting he had not seen in 12 years, and would have known in any crowd, in any condition, at any distance. His father's handwriting. Boone sat down in front of the mantel and did not move. May had come in from the doorway. She was standing at the edge of the room, watching Reed's face. "I've been keeping that," she said. "I didn't know if you'd come back." Reed looked at the envelope for a long time without touching it. He was aware of his own breathing. The envelope was still sealed. 12 years. His father had written to him and never sent it, and May Pruitt had kept it on her mantel beside Roy's photograph and the quilt and the library books for 12 years, on the understood probability that Reed Calloway would eventually come back to the land he had been running from. He picked it up with both hands. He held it. He did not open it yet. "Sit down," May said. "I'll make coffee." "Do you know someone like May? Someone who quietly held something for another person, not because they were asked, but because they knew that person would need it someday. If that person came to mind just now, call them this week. Tell me about them in the comments below. They deserve to be remembered. They sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups and the envelope between them, and May talked the way people talk who have been given a sudden license to say the things they have been holding in storage. She talked about Earl. Not his dying, but his living. The way he had come over every spring to help Roy with the back fence. The way he had brought venison after every season and left it on the porch without knocking. The way he had sat in this kitchen, at this table, in the winter after Reed's mother left, and eaten everything May put in front of him and said almost nothing and come back the following week and done it again. He talked about you, she said. Not all the time, but regularly. She looked at her cup. He was proud. He didn't know how to say it in a way that would reach you. Reed said nothing. There was nothing he trusted himself to say. He wrote that letter, May said, the week before he got sick. He called me and asked if I thought he should send it. I said yes. He said he'd think about it. She paused. He got sick before he thought about it enough. Boone had come to Reed's side of the table and pressed his full weight against Reed's leg and stayed there, warm and steady, the way he did on the bad nights in the house in Billings when the quiet had too many rooms in it. Reed picked up the letter and turned it over in his hands. I didn't make it back, he said. When he died, I was in country. I didn't. I know, May said. I should have come home sooner. After the second tour. He called and said something wasn't right, and he stopped. He had not said this to another person. He had not said it to himself out loud. It had lived inside him as a flat, permanent fact, the kind you stop arguing with because it has been there too long. I didn't ask what he meant. May looked at him with the dark, quick eyes that had been watching things clearly for 83 years. He knew, she said. He knew you were doing what you'd been raised to do. He wasn't angry, Reed. He had things to say and not enough time to say them. A silence. Outside, the snow that had been threatening since dawn began to come down for real, in the soft, heavy way of a Wyoming November that intends to stay. Reed thought about Curtis Webb saying the land remembers. He thought about a fence line walked 100 times with a man who shook hands at bus stations because that was how you said the things that didn't have words. He thought about 12 years of distance that it felt, in the truck, on Route 14, like a fact about himself he was not going to be able to change. He put the letter in his chest pocket, against his ribs, and said he'd read it when he was ready. May nodded. She refilled his cup without asking. It was then that Reed saw, through May's kitchen window, a man he didn't recognize walking the fence line between the 2 properties, not on Earl's land but alongside it, on the Mays side, with a woman in a good coat who was talking and gesturing toward both parcels. The woman had a clipboard. Reed set his cup down. May, he said. Who is that? May looked at the window. Something happened to her face, a movement that was not quite fear and not quite resignation, and was shaped like both of them at once. That's the agent, she said. Connie's people. Reed looked at the fence line. He looked at May. Both properties? May was quiet for a moment. She set her own cup down carefully, the way you set something down when you're deciding how much to say. Connie thinks I'm going to Cheyenne in the spring, she said. For a while. Are you? She looked at her hands in her lap. Her hands were steady, but everything around them, her shoulders, the set of her jaw, the particular stillness that was not the stillness of peace, told a different story. I signed papers, she said. Last January. After my hip. I don't. She paused. I didn't read them the way I should have. Reed sat very still. If you were sitting across that table from May right now, knowing what Reed now knew, watching that man walk both fence lines, what would you do? Be honest with yourself. Type yes or no in the comments. I read every one. He made 4 calls from the driveway. The first was to a property attorney in Sheridan, whose name he got from the Veterans Resource Office on a Thursday morning hunch. A woman named Linda Farrow, who listened to the summary Reed gave her in 4 minutes and said, APOA signed during or immediately after a medical procedure, without independent legal counsel, for a transaction of this size. That's a challenge. I need the documents. How soon can you get them? The second call was to May's pastor, Reverend Aldis, a man Reed had met once at Earl's funeral and who, when Reed explained the situation, said without any pause at all, I'll be there. The third call was to a woman named Sharon, who had been in May's Sunday school class for 30 years, and who was, by her own account when she answered, already on her way to May's for Wednesday coffee, and would bring somebody else. The fourth call was to his contact at the county recorder's office, who confirmed that a deed transfer filing on May Pruitt's property had been submitted 4 days prior and was scheduled to record on Friday. 4 days. The real estate agent and her client came back down the fence line at noon. Reed watched them from the kitchen window. Boone watched them from beside Reed. Neither of them moved. Connie Pruitt arrived at 2:30. She drove a clean sedan and came through May's front door in the way of a person who has been coming through it long enough to have stopped knocking. Not with hostility, but with the practiced ease of someone who has long since decided that their arrangements are the arrangements. She was in her late 50s, well put together, with the organized efficiency of a woman who had been managing things for a long time and had learned to read hesitation in others as consent. She came into the front room and stopped. Reed was at the kitchen table. Boone was on the floor beside him. Reverend Aldis was on the couch with his coat still on. Sharon was at the kitchen counter with a coffee cup, and beside Sharon was a woman named Betty, who had been at May's church since before Connie was born and who had an expression on her face that required no translation. May was in her chair by the window, sitting straight, her hands in her lap, her silver brooch in place. Connie looked at the room. She looked at her mother. Her expression did a brief recalibration. "Mom," she said. "What is this?" "These are my friends," May said. Connie looked at Reed. "And you are Reed Calloway," he said. "Earl's son, next property over." Something moved in Connie's face, a recognition, and beneath it a slight narrowing of assessment. She had done her research on that property. She knew the name. Boone had come to stand at the edge of the kitchen, between the table and the doorway, where Connie stood. He was not growling. He was simply present in the particular way of a very large dog who has decided he is not moving, solidly, completely, with no anxiety in it and no give. Connie looked at the dog. She looked back at Reed. She said to May, in the careful voice she had clearly been using for some time, "We talked about this, Mom. The move to Cheyenne is what we agreed on. The house sale is part of—" She didn't ask me. 5 words. Connie stopped speaking. May was looking at her daughter with the clear, unhurried eyes of a woman who has been on this land for 42 years and knows exactly what it means to be asked versus to be arranged. She said it without heat. She said it the way you say a fact that has been true for a long time and is only now, in front of witnesses, being spoken in its proper form. "You made the decision," May said. "You told me afterward. You said it would be good for me." She paused. "You didn't ask." Sharon put her coffee cup down. Reverend Aldous looked at the floor and then at Connie in the way that men of faith look at things they have prayed about and hope to be wrong about. Boone did not move. Connie began to say something about the power of attorney, about the paperwork, about the hip and the recovery and the decisions that it needed making. Her voice had lost its practiced ease and picked up something underneath it, not cruelty, but the particular discomfort of a woman who has been certain about something for 8 months and is discovering, in a room full of witnesses, that certainty is not the same as consent. Reed said, "The POA was signed while May was on post-surgical medication. Linda Farrow has reviewed the circumstances. The deed transfer is scheduled to record Friday. Linda is filing a petition to void the POA on grounds of incapacity at signing. The recording will be paused." He kept his voice at the same register it had been since Connie walked in. Not a raised register, not a lowered one. Even. May has not been asked what she wants. Today she's being asked. He looked at May. May looked at her daughter. "I want to stay in my house," she said. "I want to stay through another winter. I want to see the cottonwoods in the spring." She glanced toward the window, toward the fence line, toward the land she had worked alongside Roy for 42 years. And when she looked back at Connie, her voice was steady and specific and entirely her own. "That's what I want." Connie's hand, at her side, went still. She looked at her mother for a long moment. And in the particular silence that followed, in the space between a daughter who had been certain and a mother who had finally been asked, something shifted. Not repaired. Not yet. But shifted. Boone stayed at the kitchen doorway until Connie's car had gone down the drive and turned onto the road and disappeared. Then he came back to Reed's side and sat down. And Reed put one hand on the back of his neck, and the room held what it held. The POA was voided by court order 3 weeks later, on grounds of incapacity at signing. The deed transfer was reversed. May Pruitt stayed in her house on the hill above the Callaway farm for what turned out to be the winter and the spring after it. And the cottonwoods in the front yard came out in April the way they had come out for 40 years, and she was there to see them. Connie drove back to Sheridan in February, not with paperwork this time, but alone, and sat at her mother's kitchen table for most of an afternoon, and what passed between them in that time was between them. May told Reed later only that it had been hard, and that it had been necessary, and that Connie had stayed for dinner, which was the detail that mattered. Reed did not sell the farm. He was not certain, in those first weeks, that he had made a decision. It felt less like deciding and more like stopping. He stopped signing the papers. He stopped returning the real estate agent's calls. He drove out to the farm on a Sunday in December and walked the fence line in the snow, Boone at his left side, the bighorns blue and cold to the west. And he found that what Curtis Webb had said was true. The land did remember. It remembered his father's fence posts, his mother's cottonwoods, a boy who had learned to walk this particular slope before he learned almost anything else. It remembered in the way that land remembers. Not loudly, not with demands, just with an unbroken continuity that was there whether or not anyone was paying attention. He read the letter from his father on a Thursday evening, sitting at the kitchen table in the old farmhouse with a cup of coffee, and Boone asleep on the floor, and the snow coming down outside. He read it twice. He did not describe it to anyone, and he did not need to. Some things are precisely the right size for one person, and that letter was precisely the right size for Reed Callaway, and that was enough. There are moments in a person's life when the thing they have been driving away from turns out to be the thing that was waiting. Reed Callaway drove 1,400 miles expecting to close a door. He found a letter on a mantel and a woman who had kept it there for 12 years because she understood something he had not yet understood. That the people who love us do not stop waiting just because we stopped coming back. He didn't sell the farm. That is the whole of it. This story is for anyone who has been away from something they love for longer than they meant to be. And for everyone who kept a light on anyway, without being asked to. Is there someone in your life you've been meaning to go back to? A place, a person, something you left when you were young and have not yet found your way back to? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every one, and this section is full of people and places that deserve to be remembered. Every story on this channel is about choosing not to keep driving. If that means something to you, subscribe so you're here for the next one. There are more stories to tell. Which moment in this story stayed with you? I'll see you in the comments.